going to talk about action potentials today. An action potential is a rapid up and down shift of a cell's voltage, all right? The membrane voltage. So you're right now, let's say you're at the beginning, you're at resting membrane potential. The resting membrane potential for a cell is slightly negative, about negative 70 millivolts. You can account for this fact because there's more positive ions outside the cell than positive ions inside the cell. So what can account for this? One big factor is a sodium-potassium ATPase pump. This pump is active transport. Active transport because it's pumping these ions against their concentration gradient, so putting them back up where they will be at their highest. So they will not go down the concentration gradient, they're being pumped up to it. So what happens is, for an action potential, the first step is that sodium ions will begin to enter the cell. Okay? So sodium's going to be entering the cell until you reach threshold. At threshold, that is where you see the depolarization. So the action potential is going to be set. This is where you commit. When you pass threshold, you're committing to the action potential. So in this depolarization stage, more sodium is coming in, and you're going to see more sodium come in because you have these voltage-gated sodium channels. So this is an example of positive feedback. You got more sodium coming in, so you're going to get even more sodium coming in. Eventually, you're going to cross 0 millivolts in these sodium-gated voltage channels. They're going to close. And then in exchange, you're going to see some potassium voltage-gated channels open. And they're going to be pushing potassium out of the cell. So potassium will be leaving. And now the cell is getting more negative. Because when you're depolarizing the cell, you're getting more positive. And when you're repolarizing the cell, you're getting more negative. And then you see hyperpolarization. This is because these potassium channels take a while to close. They're a little slow to close. They're not rapid on, rapid off. So you're going to see a slight dip below 70 millivolts to a different value, slightly less, like slightly more negative in another way. And then they close and you return to resting membrane potential. So if they were to ask you, list the steps of an action potential. Well, first, you're at resting membrane potential, and then you see an influx of sodium ions into the cell. This will eventually cause the cell to reach threshold. You reach threshold, you are committing to the action potential itself. You get the depolarization, the sharp increase of sodium ions coming in through voltage-gated channels. And then you reach the top when you've reached an equilibria between the concentration gradients for that ion. And then these voltage-gated sodium channels close. In exchange, potassium channels that are voltage-gated open. And now potassium's leaving the cell, making the cell more negative, and that's called repolarization. Eventually, you return back to resting membrane potential, but not just quite yet, because hyperpolarization is going to occur, where because these potassium gated channels take a while to close, you're going to dip slightly more negative, they turn off, and then you're at resting membrane potential. Those are the steps for action potential. If you can list them off like that and understand that these ions are moving in, making the cell more positive, and then it goes back down to its more negative state because, like we said, the resting membrane potential is negative for a cell. It's not positive, negative. Why? Because there's more positive ions outside the cell than inside the cell. So the cell has less positive, so it's a little more negative. And that's how you can kind of keep that straight.